If you are a new visitor or a regular viewer, welcome to So What's Your Story? Today's story is part one of Pinto Portage to the Pacific. According to Webster's online dictionary, portage is an English and French word used among the early English and French trappers who came to America for the fur trade. And the portage was the carrying of boats or goods over land from one body of water to another, or around an obstacle such as rapids. In this story, I use much liberty with the word to provide some alliteration in the title and to express the carrying of all that we own. After my naval training at the NAS Memphis Millington, Tennessee, now the NAS Mid South Base, my wife and I, married just 8 months, took a cross country trip to my new duty station. And that would be in the state of California. Imagine a young couple married, we were 19 years old, venturing to move to a new state in less than 9 months after their married life for the second time from New York to Tennessee, and then from Tennessee 2 months later to California. Our vehicle of choice, that is our only vehicle, was my wife's car, her very first car, a 1971 Ford Pinto hatchback. The base stick shift was an imported 4-speed manual gearbox, typically paired with the 2.0-liter 4-cylinder engine. The Ford Pinto made its debut in the fall of 1970 when the 1971 Pinto was released for sale. The Pinto was the Ford's answer to the 1970 OPEC oil embargo and the gas crisis that followed. More than 800,000 units hit the market between 1971 and the end of 1972. But sadly, due to a design flaw in the placement of the gas tank in the early models, which our Pinto was, the Pinto got into a very early tragic rear end collision, which caused the Pinto's gas tank to burst into flames. And the end result of the passengers was not good. I think I developed as much of a relationship of love to that little car as I did with its owner. I learned how to time it, rebuild the carburetor, replace the drive shaft, and just a clutch, and even try my hand at body repair. And all of that with my wife carefully reading the famous Chilton's auto repair book as I endeavored some of these tasks. Nothing like bonding, no pun intended, for those who have tried their hand at using Bondo body repair. That little car would take us on 3 cross-country trips in the next year and a half. Well, this trip was August of 1975 with our 2 Irish setter dogs, my wife's prized plants, and everything else we owned in a homemade car top carrier that my father-in-law made. California or bust, we did go. Our first story highlight came on the first day of our trip. We decided to cross the Mississippi on a ferry, of all things. We thought that would be quite the experience. Yep, it certainly was. With our trusty Rand McNally Road Atlas, we plotted our route to the ferry. Our trip was quite uneventful until we got closer to the Mississippi. Much to our surprise, the signs were very few and far between. The residential areas became very, very sparse, and farmland and woodlands took over. One might remember the movie Deliverance. That was the feeling we began to have. The closer we got to the Mississippi, the mighty Mississippi, the narrower the road became, and the scarcer the signs became. But alas, the road opened to the ferry. As I recall, the fee was $5, but that is only a guess. It was quite a thrill, to be sure, until the West Shore got closer. I believe we crossed at the Dorian Hickman Ferry just over the border of Tennessee into Kentucky. This ferry's route goes back to the early 1800s. A pioneer named John Boyer operated an early crossing in the area to support America's western expansion. Just a side note, my ninth grade music teacher, and in later years our local community band director's name was John Boyer. So, John, if you're viewing this, who knows? Maybe you are a distant relative to this ferry's beginning. The crossing also holds some sad historic importance as it was part of the Trail of Tears where the Native American Indians were forced to leave their land between 1830 and 1850. Well, these pictures that I'm showing of today's ferry is quite similar to where we crossed. This modern shore exit resembles the site where we left the ferry, but our exit was much more rugged, all dirt, and very steep. I was not sure if the old Pinto would have the power to exit. It was that steep. But with an extra push and the pedal to the metal in first gear, old Pinto's 2.0-liter engine sent us up and over, and westward ho, we did go. Next stop, Golden, Colorado. So why Golden, Colorado? Well, with the 260 air conditioning, two windows fully down at 60 miles an hour, if we could get her up to that speed, our trip through Missouri and Kansas was uneventful except for the heat. As we headed west out of Denver on Route 70 for Vail, Colorado, our uneventful trip began to change. The Eisenhower Tunnel was originally called Straight Creek Project and was open for two-way traffic in 1973. So we thankfully could avoid the Loveland Pass route I had traveled to Vail in the 1970 to 71 as a younger teenager with friends. I wanted to take my wife to Vail to show her where I skied. So up and through the tunnel we would go. So I thought. As the journey started to maintain a very fast incline in elevation, I had to shift lower and lower in gears until the trusty Pinto was in first gear and going quite slow. I had moved to the shoulder of the road and had my wife keep her hand behind the shift lever, monitoring the heat with her hand, and it got so hot that the heat generated from the transmission caused her to not be able to keep her hand on that gearbox. So needless to say, we finally had to turn back toward Denver. So that night we headed for Golden, Colorado, where the famous Coors beer is brewed, and stayed at a lovely campsite. And then in the morning we headed back down to downtown Denver, Colorado to lighten up the load. We went to the Denver UPS to get boxes and then to the bus station, the Greyhound bus station, to pack some of our belongings plus my golf clubs and ship them to the Fresno bus station, Fresno, California. We had no place to stay, we had no address, so the only place we knew where to send them was Fresno, which was about 1 hour north of the new duty station, NAS Lemoore, California. So that station was torn down in 2021, but thankfully I found these pictures of it. That's the bus station there in Denver. And then, sadly, the Fresno station was also torn down. It's kind of an interesting thing when the places that you've been are now torn down. That's what happens when age gets to you, I guess. Well, after sending our belongings to California on the bus, off to the tunnel for a second try. Well, this time we ascended the climb without too much trouble after stopping at the local gas station on the way up to have the timing advanced a degree or two for better running in higher elevations to compensate for the thinner air. And then when I got back out of the elevation down into Utah, well, guess what? I had learned how to now advance the timing on the old Pinto. So that's what I did, so I would have a better running Pinto in the lower elevations. Thank goodness, today's vehicles, we don't have to do that. So after driving through Vail, Colorado, we headed for Route 6 that would take us across the state of Utah and Nevada and eventually to the backside of Yosemite National Park into Inyo National Forest. But that's the conclusion of part 1 of the 2-part story of Pinto Portage to the Pacific. So, stay tuned for what's